They call me Pops. My proper name is John Gallagher. Well, here it is, June 13th, 2018, and we're here to talk about some of my life and some of the things that I did as a kid, and then with Grandma Catherine, your grandmother. We were fortunate to live in the Philippines for 7 months and travel all through Southeast Asia, and then a year in London with Grandma Catherine, 3-year-old Uncle Mike, and 2-year-old Daniel. Now, I was born September 13th, 1930 in Racine, Wisconsin. Now that was right after the Depression started. But we didn't have any great problem. Fortunately, my dad always had a job. He was an engineer. But I remember my mother making homemade bread and sandwiches, and people would come to the door asking for food during the Depression. It was a tough time. And then after that, World War II started. I was too young to be in that. My dad had been in World War I, so he was too old to get into that fight. But we had a very interesting time. We moved to almost a brand new house in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And we had a victory garden. We had to raise up a lot of vegetables. And then my dad helped me build some chicken coops. And when I was about 13 and 14, I raised chickens, a lot of chickens. In fact, one summer, Grandma Queter, my grandmother, whom you know was born in 1882 or 3 in the Ukraine, in Russia. She was a Russian German. And she had a lot of ranching and farming abilities. And she came up, and one day my Grandma Queter and I killed 90 chickens. People had, during the war, food stamps. You could only get meat with certain stamps. So I went around and took orders for fresh chickens. And it was a fun time. And then when we were in Saigon, Ruth was working with her MBA class from DU, and I was working in a hospital, and we both happened to go to, at different times, to an art gallery. On the second floor we saw this. I liked it immediately. There's Lord Buddha there, and it's a house The artist is from a town south of Hanoi in North Vietnam. And the interesting thing, we wondered, how will we get this back? And they said, we'll just wrap it up and ship it. And I said, are you sure? Well, we had done this before around the world. And I said, I like the frame. They said, well, we'll probably take it out of the frame. I said, then I don't want it. He said, okay, we'll do it. And I said, give me a pen. And I got in the back and I put my name on the back of the frame on all 4 areas. And I said, there's my initial, I want that. So I made sure that I got the frame. I had a fun time. When I was about 14 and 15, I spent 2 summers on the farm in Albion, Nebraska. And that was great. It was Albion is a little town of about 4,000 people in eastern Nebraska. And I traveled down there by bus at 14.
By yourself?
By myself.
Who did you live with?
I lived with my Uncle Tony.
Oh.
And for a while, he would farm me out to various relatives who had farms and ranches who needed help. And I went out and I had one about 2 or 3 week time in the western Nebraska on a ranch riding fence. Now you probably don't know what riding fence means.
No.
Well, you get on a horse in the morning with your lunch and water and a lot of tools, and you have to ride for hours along a fence line. Wherever you saw a break in the fence, you had to repair it.
Oh.
But to do that, the most important thing was to hobble the horse, because they said if you let that horse leave, he's going to run back, and you got a long walk back.
Oh gosh.
So I would make sure I hobbled the horse so you could just do this, bounce along. So that was good fun. Do you ladies have any questions? Now this is Abby and Sarah Plumunden, 2 of my 6 granddaughters.
Oh.
So there they are. Now, do you have any questions about what life was like growing up?
Can you tell me about the holidays, what they were like when you grew up?
Well, the big thing was moving into this house here 50 years ago in 1968. Your mom was 3 years old. I had finished my surgical training, my 5 years of residency. We came out and bought a little home in in Walnut Hills. And there weren't many homes around there then. So Uncle Mike and I could sit on the back porch and shoot at prairie dogs with a .22. It was perfectly legal at that time. But then we decided your Grandma Catherine knew that she had a shortened life expectancy, and she wanted to build a home. So I went deeply in debt, borrowed money, we bought this land here, and we built this house. And it just was probably the best thing we ever could do, because Grandma Catherine lived longer than we thought she was going to. So she had a good 8 years in this house. And when we first moved in, we had this big room here, but we couldn't afford any furniture. So we had bean bags. And at Christmas time, we'd get a little Christmas tree, a bean bag would be where we would relax and sit. But then we had all this room, so we would have parties here. The surgical party for Presbyterian Hospital and St. Joe's Hospital used to be held at this house because it was so big and didn't have any furniture. And so it was a marvelous big thing.
Yeah.
And then, as I indicated earlier, when about after 15 years when Ruth and I were married, after Grandma Catherine died, this house stopped right over there, and Ruth said, let's build onto the house. Well, that changed everything, because we said, we've got all these grandkids, we're going to have big parties here. And then Ruth was chief of orthopedic surgery at St. Joe's Kaiser, and every time someone would be taken in as a partner, we'd have to have a party, so it was held here.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of room and a lot of parties, and that was good fun. And we now have plenty of room, and as you know, we still have a lot of good parties.
Yeah.
But my first real adventure, and I've told you ladies about this, I had to drop out of high school for a semester. So I worked at Nash Motors. I was 17, and I could work in the factory for a few months. And I worked the graveyard shift from 11 at night till 7 in the morning. I rode my bike back and forth to the factory. But then my dad said, I've got a worker who has an old Model A Ford that doesn't work. He'll sell it to me for 30 bucks.
Oh, $30.
$30.
Nice.
So maybe we can fix it up. So they hauled this old Model A Ford, 1931 Cabriolet, into the garage, and we took the engine apart, and we actually got it going.
Oh.
It used a ton of oil because we didn't have the right equipment to really gauge the rings and wrist pins that went on the pistons, but it worked. So I had a way to get to the factory, and then my good friend who lived behind me, Bob Ruffalo, and I decided to go to Mexico.
Yeah.
I was 18 and he was 19, so we drove that Model A Ford from Kenosha, Wisconsin to Laredo, Texas, right on the border.
Oh my gosh.
And we had a great 6-week trip into Mexico. We were fortunate, after we sold the Model A for 90 bucks.
You made money.
Made a little money. We got on the bus and met a couple of Mexican guys who had been in a prep school in Texas. They were going back to their family in Mexico City. They invited us for dinner in this palatial home. The home was so big it had its own chapel. A priest would come and say Mass on Sunday at their home.
Wow.
So we had some good friends, and we saw them in subsequent trips to Mexico.
That's crazy.
Now, then I came back and went to Marquette University School of Medicine. And it was I had graduated from Mary D. Bradford Public High School in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That was not a big deal. And I got up there and they had 300 of us in a big auditorium. We were the pre-med students. And the dean of the medical school got up and said, we have 103 in the class. We take 50 of you, 350 of you guys, and then 50 from around the country and the world. We had one guy from the Gold Coast of Africa in our class. At any rate, so he said, look around and see who will be in the group of 50. And I looked around and I saw some guys that I knew who had been to Jesuit prep schools, boarding schools. I thought, my God, a graduate of Mary D. Bradford, so I'm gonna have to work like heck.
Yeah.
So I did.
And you did, nice. So only 50 of the 300 made it.
50 of the 300 made it, yeah. And one of my guys that I roomed with didn't make it, and he went into dental school. And he was very happy.
Yeah.
Very happy. Now here are some other interesting things. This is a wedding bowl made by a famous New Mexico pot maker. There's a book in the study about this lady. And Johnny Phillips, who was looking after some Indians in New Mexico, got this for our wedding present. And this old pot here that I have a sign for the cleaning people, no touch, because they broke it once. This was given to me by Pam's mother, Dorothy, as a birthday gift.
Wow.
And I really like it. And this should go to your mother, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
And here's something that your dad showed an interest in. They had a train wreck in Jakarta, Indonesia, and I flew down with the Navy from Manila down Lowell. Not a jet, it was before the jets. It was a super Constellation, 4 propellers, and went to Jakarta, Indonesia. And the Indonesians didn't like Americans, so they said, everyone's either well or they're dead, you're too late. So I had a list that Graham and Catherine had given me of what to buy. And this is one of the things I saw. It's an Indonesian Madonna. And I think I've got down here, your dad said he liked this, and I want this to go to your dad.
Okay.
The Indonesian Madonna. And this is from Bhutan in the Himalayas. Sales and I hiked with a group up to 16,000 feet, and at 13,000 we camped at a yak herder's village. And I got, these are yak harnesses. Tweed thinks it's a doorbell. Okay, Tweed, it's all right.
I didn't know that Grandma Catherine's dad was your doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how you guys met each other?
Pardon?
Because I knew you guys were friends.
Oh, yeah. Well, I met Grandma Catherine when she was 5 years old, and I was 10 years old. And I can remember she was walking along, and her mother, Mildred, Grandma Schulte, was pushing a pram that Wheezy was in. And I think Wheezy or Jane. And Catherine had little white socks on, I remember. She was 5 years old, I go on. But then, interestingly enough, you know, I got going in med school, and she went off to Loretta Heights College, which is right over here, here in Denver.
She moved.
Well, she went to the college, yeah.
Yeah.
It was run by nuns, and then we got together for one of the Christmases or Easter or something. I noticed she's not a little girl anymore.
Oh my goodness.
And so we started a relationship.
Oh,
And I started driving from Kenosha, Wisconsin out here, and I discovered 2 things: Loretta Heights College and CAF and Colorado.
yeah.
And it was like going from a black and white movie to Technicolor.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was sunny and bright here, and we would take the car I was driving. I had an old car, and we'd go up to the mountains, and there was snow on the ground.
Whoa.
In the spring sometimes. It was
so
absolutely
fun.
great. And here are some, these are, if you can see this, This is my great grandparents. The photo was taken where they were born in the Ukraine, in Russia. They were Russian Germans. They made it very clear. My grandmother was born in 1882. This was her mother, who was a Getzfried, and her father was a Sticker. Those were their names. And my grandma Queter was born around 1882, and then she was 12 years old when she came to this country, and they lived in a sod house in western Nebraska. And that's all in that book.
Your book.
Yeah. These little bikes here are Bike Fridays. They fold up and go into a suitcase.
Oh.
And we did a ride the Rockies on these little bikes, 500 miles. We biked across Sweden with Lars and Maud, our Swedish friends, and we biked across Italy on these little things. The only time we ever had a problem, we went to St. Petersburg, Russia, and the Russians opened up and they said, "What is that?"
Bike.
And I said it was a bike, and they couldn't. I had to take it out, put it partially together to prove that it was a bike. The Russians were the only ones that gave us trouble.
Okay, what was school like for you as a child?
Well, I was at St. Mark's. When I first started off, I didn't want to leave home. I don't know if there was something wrong with me, but the first day I ran away. I left school and they found me in a graveyard picking up all the flags on the graves of the soldiers.
Oh God.
So, but then fortunately, there was an old sister in first grade, Sister Dorothy, and she and I got along beautifully, and I started liking school. So I had a tough start.
Yeah.
But I had some great mentors. In high school, before I got sick, when they thought I had leukemia and was going to die and all that stuff, I thought the most important thing was playing football. But then when I got sick, I couldn't play football. So I thought, well, I better study. And that changed everything. There was an old chemistry teacher, Mrs. Harrington, I think her name was. And she helped me in chemistry. And I enjoyed it. And that just was fun. So I enjoyed school then. Any other questions that?
I want to ask about Grandma Catherine more.
Sure.
Can you tell me about when you decided to get married and?
Well, as I told you earlier, growing up, the Schulte family and their 5 kids, before the war, then when Dr. Schulte went over to Saipan with the Navy, my father would help if something went wrong with Grandma Schulte's house, and I would go over and mow the lawn, and the girls would make it difficult for me, and I was mowing the lawn and I'd holler at them. But, and then as I indicated, when I got into medical school, I noticed that Catherine, their oldest daughter, had grown up and she was going to college at Loretta Heights College out here in Denver. And that's when I started, as I indicated, to notice her. And I started coming out and visiting her. She always had to be in by 11 o'clock, or the nuns would be standing at the door of the dorm, checking her in. but I would drive from Kenosha to Denver. And everyone in Kenosha thought that we would get married, which we did, and then they sort of assumed I would join her father as a family doc, which I didn't do because I got interested in surgery. And fortunately, you know, I was moving around in the Far East, and it was a fun time because Grandma Catherine was healthy when we were in the Philippines.
Yeah.
She taught swimming to the little kids. You know, one thing that I think you and your mother know very well is that Grandma Catherine, at the age of 15, was on the KYF, Kenosha Youth Foundation, swim team.
Yeah.
And they became nationally known as a top swim team. And actually, she and 3 other girls they broke the national women's, not kids or girls, national women's NCAA record for the 200-meter freestyle or something. You have her gold medal. I put it in a frame.
Yeah. It's
And we were so pleased. But then she came down with diabetes.
Yeah.
And she never swam again competitively. She just quit.
Did you guys move out here once you guys decided to get married?
Yeah, when we got married in Kenosha at St. Mark's Church, same place I went to grade school. And we came out here and interned here in St. Joe's Hospital in Denver. And then I went in the Navy because there was a doctor draft. So I thought I better join the Navy. And I signed on for an extra 6 months so I could get into flight surgeon school. And that was fun. We went to Pensacola, Florida. For 6 months, I was in flight surgeon school. The first 4.5 months was all studying and exams and classroom. And we were all graded. There were 32 in the class. And halfway through that 4.5 months, they came out with a list of where we were going to be sent when we finished. And they pointed out the number 1 guy in your class will get to choose of which one he wants to go to. The last guy in your class takes what's the last place.
Yeah.
As it turned out, 3 of the guys of the 32 had made number 1 in their medical school class. They were really smart. And the number 1 guy was from Iowa, University of Iowa, and he picked what we all thought was going to go first, Rota, Spain. So he's had 2 years in Rota, Spain.
Oh.
The last guy in the class, a poor guy, ended up in Adak, Alaska. That's the tip of the Aleutian Islands. There is a little medical naval base there.
Where did you go, Pops?
I went to where I wanted to go. I was right in the middle. It's the story of my life. I was right in the middle of the class. And I got San Diego, Miramar Naval Air Station, right outside of La Jolla, California, and San Diego. And I had a carrier air group.
Was Grandma Catherine still in college when you were in the Navy?
No, she had graduated while I was interning. So she had to do that teaching assistant or something. Mm-hmm. She did that, and then she got her degree so that when we were in the Navy, she successfully was pregnant. She had had a lot of miscarriages, but that's when Mike was born. And I was out on a carrier about 300 miles out in the Pacific, out from San Francisco, and I got a call from the carrier. It said, Lieutenant Gallagher, get to the bridge. The bridge is up in the top of the aircraft carrier. Yeah. And I went up there, and there was the commander of our air group, Butch Forrest, marvelous guy. He said, Jack, I understand that Catherine's going to have a C-section tomorrow at Mercy Hospital in San Diego. You ought to be there. I said, yes, sir. He said, I'll fly you off right now. He said, there's a AD, it's an attack bomber with 2 seats side by side.
Yeah.
He said, get down on that AD and take off the flight deck. So we did. And I was there when Mike was born.
What was that like?
Well, it was a C-section, so, we knew exactly when. Oh, it was great. And Kath did very well. And within 2 days, we were walking around La Jolla. I had Mike in my back. We didn't have good baby carriers then. I had an old Boy Scout rucksack that I cut holes for his legs and just stuck him in there with diapers all around him. And it was marvelous. Just marvelous. Okay, now ladies, this room has a lot of different stuff in it. Mm-hmm. As you know, your grandma Catherine and I lived in the Philippine Islands for 7 months, and I particularly had to travel with the Navy to various places that Mr. Tweed. Why don't you let him out? And we'll keep talking. So look up there, and you can see there's on the right, or no, that's shield on the right are the Igros, former headhunters, had that shield, and that little knife here I got that from one of the former headhunters. That saber there is from India. We went into Jaipur, India, and went to a museum and walked through it with a guide, and the guide said, do you see anything you might want to buy here? And I said, buy? This is a museum. He said, we sell anything. And he took us in the back room, and I bought that saber right there from the Mughal Empire. And the only problem is when we were leaving India, a Sikh, with a turban and all was out there. He said, you can't take this weapon out of India.
No.
And I thought, oh God. Well, right next to him was a little Hindu fellow. And he said, I'll take care of it. He said, I hate Sikhs. So I gave him a little baksheesh, a little bit of money, and he said, it's in your packages. So we managed to get that out, along with the that big brass table that's in the living room.
Yeah.
But the only problem we had is we got to Saigon, and there was a shoot-up. Some of the Vietnamese had dropped some bombs or something in Saigon, and they took we were going space available, and they took all of our bags and left them on the runway. And they said, we don't have room for them. But fortunately, the guy who was a co-pilot, I knew at Marquette in college.
Oh.
And I went up to the cockpit and I said, our stuff is on the runway. He said, I'll take care of it.
Oh my goodness.
And he sent some enlisted men, some white hats, Navy guys down. They picked it up and they put it, he said, we'll put it in the crew's head, in the crew's bathroom. So we got all of our stuff back from our trip to India.
Good.
And so we were really lucky. And then here are some bowguns and spears from the southern Luzon around Palawan. And now right over here, do you see that bow and arrow? That is made by that little lady in the photograph there. She was a pygmy.
That is such a cool photo.
Negrito, a black person in all of the Malay Filipinos, who are not black. But there was a little tribe of pygmies living in Luzon. We did celebrate, we used to take 22 rifle shorts. They're the small shells. Go out at night with headlamps, flashlights, and there would be huge bullfrogs. And all you had to do was take your rifle and get anywhere near them, the head, and they would flop over, and you go and we'd throw them in a gunny sack. And so we'd get a whole bunch of bullfrogs and clean them and keep the legs and freeze them. And then we celebrated, I think it was right after the Japanese surrendered. My Uncle Tony had a big beer party. We had soda pop too, obviously. And they had the bullfrog legs, frog legs, and also I had helped Uncle Rommel, I think his name was, castrate some sheep. And we had sheep's testicles. And we fried those up too. So we had, I remember this crazy meal of frog legs and sheep testicles. This is a Nepalese kukri, and it's a beautiful thing.
So cool.
Now the other sharp thing here is Eric's sword from West Point over there. And then this is one of the most valuable things that I have. And I have two of them. It's a Civil War surgical kit. This is before sterilization. So all the handles are ivory. So they were not sterilized during the Civil War. They were just washed and dried. And then most of it was for if you were shot in the arm or the leg, they amputated. Wherever you were shot, they just amputated. If you were shot in the belly, they would leave you on the ground. They wouldn't even take you to the hospital because they knew you'd die.
Oh my gosh.
So the first thing people did when they were shot is to check to see if they were shot in the belly.
It's horrible.
So these are two Civil War surgical kits. And I pointed out earlier the headhunters, the Igorots. Well, this is what they look like here.
Oh,
So look at the pipe.
yeah.
So this is from northern Luzon, the Igorots. And now all of these books I got over in London. So, many of them are medical, but the two auction houses, Sotheby's and Quiznos, or not Quiznos, Sotheby's and the other auction house, I can't think of the name of it. If they didn't sell it during the auction, they would bring it down to Farringdon Road, no matter what the weather is. They'd lay the books out in these long tables, and you could get them for 10 shillings, sixpence or something. And I would buy all of various things. These books here, I have a chapter in each one of these, and I hope that someday, before they throw them out, you'll just look and see what I had to write.
Pops, you've traveled to a lot of places. Which has been your favorite?
A lot of people have asked me. I used to think that the most interesting city was Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Because I was there the first time, when I was in the Philippines, I was not with fighter planes, I was with seaplanes then. And twice a week, we had a seaplane going up to Hong Kong. Well, you could go up there and buy all this stuff. I mean, I knew I was going in a 5-year surgical residency, and I think I told you, I bought something like 8 pair of shoes. I had them made for me because they were cheap. Yeah. They did good work. We had a naval list of people that made shoes, shirts, suits. The shoemaker, and I can show you up at Edgewood, our place in the mountains. I have a shoehorn, Lee Key shoemaker, and we used to call him Lee Key No Squeak, because so often the aircraft carriers would go into Hong Kong, and these white hats, the enlisted men, would pour out, go in and have a suit made and have shoes made, all within 12 or 24 hours. That's all the time they had. And the shoe, you can always tell someone who had been to Hong Kong because his shoes would squeak. When we got back to San Diego, we'd hear someone come down, quack, quack, quack. And they always said, it wasn't Lee Key, no squeak.
What's your most valued memory? What's your most valued memory?
I think I have a lot of them, but certainly one that I value was our year in England. Grandma Catherine was healthy. Mike and Dan were there. It was fun. And I was happy working at St. Bartholomew's. You've been to St. Bartholomew's. Mm-hmm. Luke, St. Bartholomew's is the oldest hospital in the world. It was started in 1123 and has been going continuously for over 900 years. It was only stopped for a fortnight, 2 weeks, when Henry VIII stopped it to get rid of all the priests and the nuns who were running St. Bartholomew's. He got rid of them all. But it took 2 weeks to clear the hospital of all the Catholics. Because Henry VIII didn't want them there. Ruth and I have collected maps over the years. We have them all over the house. And a lot of it has to do, when we biked across Italy, we got an old map of Italy. Mm-hmm. And it shows where we started in the Adriatic Sea and biked through Umbria and over to the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And then various places that we've been, and then some of these things I got in England. Here's St. Bartholomew's Church and Hospital, right here, the oldest hospital in the world. Here's the Matterhorn that Ruth and I climbed. It took us 2 years. The first year we never made it because of weather. Made it the second year. Uncle Mike made it his first try. And then this is what I had in my office. My Marquette University, the Board of Surgery, and the American College of Surgeons. And then some funny stuff that sales sent from London. Like this here too. And then if you look up here, you see that skull up there?
Yeah.
That is a pre-Columbian skull that's elongated in infancy because it was the calvarium. It was not, they would bind a baby's head so it would grow long, girls only. So they had a long head, and that's one of the examples right up there. Some of these things, here's a bleeding bowl from St. Bartholomew's Hospital. They'd do this and they'd bleed. See, St. B.H., St. Bartholomew's Hospital. And I've written on the back here, too.
Or it's bleeding bowl.
I think the most interesting country was India at that time. See, again, this is before the Vietnam War was really kicking up.
Yeah.
And Thailand, now you haven't been there, but boy, your cousins certainly have been. Claire and Scotty and Eric have all been to Thailand. The first time Grandma Catherine and I went to Thailand, it was quiet. They didn't have big roads. Everyone went by canals, klongs they called them. So just poling along, very quiet. But then when the Vietnam War came and they started sending American troops over there for R&R, rest and recuperation, and they started building all these big highways. So that was interesting. India was interesting because you could walk down the street and you could look at anyone immediately and say, that's a Muslim, or he's a Hindu, just the way they're dressed. He's a Sikh, he's got a turban, beard, has to wear a bangle, has to carry a knife. Most of them carry a small knife in their turban. Even today, if you go into a hospital and you see a doctor with a turban on, he's Sikh. And look at his right wrist, and you'll see a brass bangle. That's part of the religion. They have to wear that. And you won't ask him this, but you could say, where's your knife? Because somewhere on his body, he's got a little ceremonial knife. They used to carry big ones. But so India was very interesting. Nice thing. There's another St. Bartholomew's picture. And here's a pot when we were hiking for 5 weeks on a climbing thing over in Nepal in the Ganesh Himal up along the Tibet border.
Yeah.
And it had been closed for 19 years because there was an argument between the Chinese and the Nepalese. So we were the first people in there in 19 years, and the Tamang tribesmen, they had handmade wooden things for the goat's milk and all. Wow. We had some plastic containers, which they couldn't believe. That we could drop them and bounce them, and I got this. I gave him money. I didn't want to give him a plastic thing for such a nice thing as this. And that's about all. Luke, I want to thank you for doing this, and to you ladies, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to say that I've enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to celebrating my 88th birthday rafting the Grand Canyon this September. Goodbye.